"You must have lost your way," were the chilling words Marla uttered, her voice laced with faux concern as I found myself unable to enter my own home, my key futile against the new locks. I stood frozen on the porch, disbelief and anger brewing inside me as I stared at the smug expression on my mother-in-law's face. At 58, Marla still exuded an air of aristocracy and old money, draped in designer clothes and jewelry that sharply contrasted my casual, thrift store-inspired style. "What's going on, Marla?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. "Why can't I get into my house?" "Oh, sweetie, I think you're confused," Marla replied, her words dripping with condescension. "This is my son Elliot's house. Now why don't you run along home to your little apartment?" My hands curled into fists as I fought the urge to grab Marla and force my way inside. This was the house I had grown up in, that my parents had left to me when they passed away last year. Elliot and I had spent the last 6 months renovating it, infusing each room with special touches that represented our shared vision for our future. This was my sanctuary, my pride and joy. And now Marla was trying to take it all away. "Don't play games with me," I said sharply. "You know very well this is my house. Now open the door and let me in." Marla sighed theatrically. "I'm afraid that's simply not possible. You see, Elliot signed the house over to me for safekeeping while he's away on business. We can't have undesirables barging in now, can we?" My blood boiled at her words. Elliot, my husband of 5 years, was currently on an extended work trip in Japan. He always fretted about me being alone, but I cherished my independence. Little did I know, he had made arrangements behind my back and given his manipulative mother total control in his absence. I took a deep breath, willing myself to remain calm. "Elliot would never sign over my house without talking to me first." "You're lying, Marla." "Am I?" she challenged, her brown eyes glinting. "Why don't you give my darling son a call and find out?" I wanted nothing more than to wipe that smug look off Marla's face. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. "Fine. I'll call Elliot and clear this whole thing up," I replied evenly. "But don't get too comfortable in my home. You won't be staying long." Marla merely chuckled and waved her fingers at me in farewell. As I walked down the front steps, I turned to see her disappear inside, closing the door firmly behind her. Rage and disbelief warred within me as I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house I had poured my heart into. Marla had always resented my common upbringing, believing her precious architect son could do better than a freelance graphic designer. But I never imagined her snobbery and disdain would manifest in something so cruel. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Elliot's number. He answered on the 3rd ring, his cheerful voice like a balm to my soul. I quickly explained what had happened with Marla. A heavy silence followed, broken only by Elliot's deep sigh. "Corinne, there's something I have to tell you." "I can't believe you would do this to me," I said, my voice trembling as I paced the small confines of my studio apartment. On the video call, Elliot looked back at me helplessly. "I'm so sorry, Corinne. I never meant for it to happen this way. My mother ambushed me with the paperwork just as I was leaving for the airport. She claimed it was just a temporary measure for emergencies. I didn't realize she had other plans." I raked my fingers through my hair in frustration. "Your mother has always hated me. How could you think giving her any control over my house was a good idea?" "You're right. I messed up," Elliot admitted. "I let my mother manipulate me, and you're paying the price." I sighed, my anger dissipating. I knew Marla's conniving ways all too well. "Well, it's done now. We need to focus on getting my house back." "I'll be home as soon as I can. We'll sort this out, I promise," Elliot replied. We said our goodbyes, and I sank down onto my lumpy mattress, wondering how I had gone from renovating my childhood home to being effectively homeless in just one day. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine. Each morning, I stopped by the house, knocking loudly despite knowing Marla wouldn't let me in. I needed her to know I wasn't going anywhere. Afternoons were spent at coffee shops, using their Wi-Fi to work on freelance design projects. Evenings were reserved for takeout food and strategizing my next moves with my friend Julia over the phone. Nearly a week had passed when I returned to the house one morning to find the front door unexpectedly ajar. I entered cautiously, surprised by the drastic changes that had already taken place. The beautiful pottery and artwork I had proudly displayed were gone, replaced by garish paintings I recognized from Marla's previous home. My cozy, bohemian furnishings had disappeared, swapped for stiff, antique pieces that exuded cold formality. "Hello, dear, I hope you like what I've done with the place." Marla's falsely sweet voice rang out as she sashayed into the room. I bit my tongue to stop myself from screaming at her. "Didn't take you long to make yourself at home," I said bitterly. "Well, it is my home now," Marla replied snidely. "Anyway, I'm hosting the Ladies' Society tea here tomorrow. I assume you can show yourself out?" I stood there fuming as she prattled on about plans for redecorating the kitchen and removing the flower garden I had painstakingly nurtured. It was clear she intended to erase any trace of me from this house, from my colorful tiles in the bathroom to the secret hideout Elliot and I had built as kids. "Just remember, this isn't over," I told Marla as I left, catching a glimpse of her scowling before the door slammed shut behind me. As I walked back to my car, I took some deep breaths, trying to regain my composure. I knew Marla's scheme was only beginning, and I would need to be strategic and resilient to survive this battle. But as I caught sight of my childhood home one last time, I made a vow. One way or another, I was taking back what was mine. The next few weeks were agonizing. Marla's presence seemed to infest every aspect of my life, no matter how hard I tried to avoid her. She hijacked the weekly neighborhood potluck, critiquing my common potato salad recipe and insisting on upscale catering instead. When I volunteered at the community garden, she was suddenly everywhere, gossiping loudly about my unladylike appearance. At the grocery store one day, I overheard her telling the cashier about Elliot's gold-digging wife who married him for his money. I had to stop myself from dumping my cart of items over her primly styled hair. The final straw came when she crashed the annual fundraising gala for the youth art program I had helped launch. I was mingling with donors when Marla appeared, interrupting every conversation to shift focus towards herself. "You'll have to excuse my daughter-in-law's eccentric taste in fashion," she simpered to a businessman I was speaking with. "I do wish Elliot had chosen someone a bit more polished, but we make do." I clenched my fist tightly around my champagne glass to stop it from shaking. The past few weeks of Marla's non-stop attacks had pushed me to my breaking point. I wanted nothing more than to scream at her to stop ruining my life, but I knew that's exactly what she wanted, a public spectacle that made me look deranged. So I quietly excused myself from the conversation and slipped outside, taking deep breaths of the cool night air. I tried Elliot's number again, but my call went straight to voicemail. With his long hours and remote job site, our communication had dwindled to quick check-ins and fuzzy video calls. I had never felt more alone. I steeled myself and went back inside, avoiding Marla for the rest of the evening. When I arrived home that night, I realized she had escalated her sabotage. A large moving truck was parked outside, and two burly men were hauling my furniture and belongings out the front door. "What are you doing?" I cried, rushing over. "Just doing a bit of redecorating, dear," Marla called out from the porch, smirking. "I donated your tacky old things to charity. Don't worry, the new items will be much more elegant." I helplessly watched years of my collected items disappear into the truck. The quilt my grandmother had stitched, the retro table Elliot had refurbished for my birthday, the overstuffed sofa covered in memories. Soon, nothing remained but empty rooms and the biting scent of fresh paint. Numbly, I entered my tiny apartment. Any remaining energy had been sapped, replaced by a cold sense of hopelessness. I had tried to fight back subtly against Marla, but at every turn she had outmaneuvered me. As I lay in bed that night, darkness clawing at the edges of my mind, a single thought emerged like a flicker of light. If I couldn't win by playing nice, it was time to get tough. Marla wanted a war? That's exactly what she would get. The next morning, I began to plan my counterattack. I sat staring in disbelief at the legal document in my hands, the words blurring together. Marla hadn't just manipulated her way into my home. She had actually made herself a co-owner through fraudulent means. According to the paperwork, she had produced a handwritten will, supposedly left by my late father, stating he wanted Marla to have joint custody of the house. But I knew without a doubt it was fake. My father had made me the sole beneficiary in his official will, leaving me the house and small inheritance. Marla had woven an elaborate scheme to steal everything. I sucked in a sharp breath, trying to calm the rage bubbling inside me. After speaking with my lawyer, I now understood the full extent of Marla's deceit. She had been planning this for a while, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and I had played right into her hands by not having my own name added to the property records once I inherited it. Marla must have fabricated the will, bribed an official, and then coerced Elliot into signing over temporary rights in his absence. She knew I didn't have the proper legal documentation to fight back, or the money for a prolonged legal battle. I had spent the last few days camped out in my car near the house, only leaving to use the gym showers and pick up snacks. I was determined to confront Marla face to face about her duplicity. When her Cadillac finally pulled into the driveway, I leaped out of my car and rushed over before she could escape inside. "Well, look who it is," Marla sneered. "Come to beg for money, or just to admire my lovely new landscaping?" "Cut the act, Marla," I snapped. "I know what you did. You forged a will so you could steal my house." I waved the document in her face. Marla glanced at it casually, then met my gaze with an icy stare. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but clearly the stress has become too much for you." She spoke slowly, as if addressing a child throwing a tantrum. "Enough!" I shouted, finally losing my cool. "That will is fake, and you know it. My father would never have left you anything. You're a lying, manipulative thief." For a long moment we stood there, eyes locked, the truth hanging nakedly between us. Then Marla's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Sweet, naive girl. Even if what you're alleging is true, do you really think you can stop me? I hold all the power now. The law, money, status, it's all on my side." She leaned in close, her cultured voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Face it, you don't belong here. Why don't you crawl back to the gutter where you came from?" I recoiled at her words, the pain cutting deeply. But the initial anguish quickly transformed into iron resolve. I had tried handling this legally and ethically, and it had failed. Now it was time for a new strategy, no matter how extreme. Marla seemed to sense the shift in me. For the first time, a shadow of uncertainty flickered across her face. I gave her a thin smile. "You're right about one thing, Marla. You've held all the power until now, but that ends today." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing agape on the sidewalk. I had a lot of planning to do and nothing to lose. The time had come for war. Over the next few weeks, I became consumed with gathering evidence against Marla. I knew I needed hard proof of her deceit if I had any hope of reclaiming my house legally. I started with the fake will, working with a lawyer friend to analyze the document. We discovered anomalies. The wrong type of paper, a font that didn't exist when my father was alive. It was enough to cast serious doubts about its authenticity. Next, I reached out to my father's old business partner, someone I knew Marla had been cozying up to for years. After some persuasion, he finally admitted she had asked him to act as a witness and verify the will. The final piece fell into place. I also began trailing Marla, documenting her activities and conversations. Most days she flitted aimlessly around town, a bored socialite looking to stir up drama. But she seemed to have a weekly appointment that piqued my interest, a visit to a rundown apartment building on the edge of town. One overcast Tuesday, I followed Marla's Cadillac to the familiar spot and watched her disappear inside. A few minutes later she emerged looking worried, accompanied by a squat, nervous-looking man I recognized as the town clerk. After exchanging whispered words and passing a thick envelope, they quickly parted ways. My mind raced with possibilities. Blackmail? Bribery? Either way, this man clearly knew secrets that could threaten Marla's polished veneer. Over the next few weeks, I continued tailing Marla, compiling a detailed record of her activities and odd meetings. Her mask of aristocracy and moral superiority had slipped, revealing deceit and corruption. I wanted it all exposed. The final piece fell into place when I convinced the nervous clerk to meet me one night for drinks. A few rounds later, his lips started to loosen, confessing how Marla had paid him handsomely over the years to conveniently lose certain records and speed along questionable documents. Armed with this arsenal of evidence, I requested an emergency hearing with the judge overseeing my house dispute. My lawyer and I laid out the paper trail of fraud and deception Marla had perpetrated to gain control. After reviewing the proof, the judge agreed to freeze all actions relating to the property's ownership until a full investigation could be completed. For the first time in months, I felt empowered again. The law had failed me before, but now justice finally seemed within reach. Marla must have realized her scheme was unraveling. She became a ghost, her usual swarm of social activity ceasing. No more smug morning jogs past my car. No more popping into restaurants to loudly discuss her summer plans for my home improvements. But her disappearance didn't fool me. I knew this temporary retreat was just the quiet before the storm, a chance for her to strategize how she could regain the upper hand. Well, I was done being strategic. Marla wanted an all-out war, I would give her one. And this time, only one of us was walking away victorious. The day of the showdown arrived. Armed with my evidence, I marched up to the front door of my house, ready to confront Marla for the last time. Before I could knock, the door swung open abruptly. Marla stood there scowling, clearly perturbed that I had caught her off guard. "What do you want now?" she snapped. "We need to talk," I replied evenly. "May I come in?" Marla hesitated before reluctantly stepping aside. I crossed the threshold, my emotions swirling as I stood in the home that had been stolen from me. Nothing looked familiar anymore. My bohemian decor had been replaced by gaudy antiques and impersonal minimalism. But underneath Marla's superficial touches, the heart and bones of the home remained. The flow of the rooms my mother had designed, the creaks in the floorboards my father had never fixed. I took a deep breath. "I know what you did, Marla. The will was fake. You bribed the clerk. You have no legal right to my house." Marla scoffed. "You have no proof of these ridiculous allegations. I'm growing very tired of your harassment." I held her icy gaze unflinchingly. "Actually, I have plenty of proof. Sworn statements exposing your lies, records of your shady dealings. I know enough to destroy your facade of respectability." Marla's defiant expression wavered slightly. I pressed my advantage. "It's over. Your schemes stop now. Vacate my home immediately, or I take this evidence to court and ensure you face charges." Heavy silence descended as Marla stared at me stone-faced. For a moment I thought she might actually acquiesce. Then her lips curled into a sneer. "Do you think a few pieces of paper can scare me? I built an empire while you still clung to your parents' apron strings. No one will believe the delusional ramblings of a petty little—" "Mom, stop." We both turned in shock at the newcomer's voice. Elliot stood in the doorway, suitcase in hand, his face etched with grief and disappointment. Marla's haughty demeanor instantly melted. "Elliot, you're home early." She scurried over, attempting an embrace. He held up a hand. "I heard enough, Mom. Corinne told me everything. How could you betray me like this?" "She's lying," Marla shrieked, pointing a manicured finger my way. "I'm the victim here. This vindictive girl has done nothing but spew vicious untruths since the day you married her." "No more lies," Elliot thundered. "I made excuses for you my whole life, but I won't let you hurt my family anymore." He moved to stand by my side, slipping his hand into mine. Marla gaped at him in disbelief. "Darling, please, be reasonable," she implored, her voice cracking. "I'm done being reasonable," Elliot replied wearily. "This ends today. Vacate Corinne's home now and never bother us again." Marla stared wildly between us, the madness clear in her eyes. For a moment I thought she might lash out physically in a final desperate act, but Elliot's stoic presence kept her contained. Finally, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Without another word, she shoved past us and disappeared into the guest room, emerging minutes later with 2 hastily packed suitcases. Elliot kept his eyes trained on the floor as his mother paused next to him, waiting for some show of affection, forgiveness, anything. But he remained stony and silent. The click of her heels faded as Marla retreated down the walk. I watched through the window as her Cadillac glided away, disappearing around the corner, perhaps for the last time. In the weeks following Marla's eviction, Elliot and I worked non-stop to reclaim the house. We boxed up her garish furnishings and listed them for sale, using the money to restore the cozy bohemian aesthetic I had lovingly created. Elliot immersed himself in repairing the structural damage Marla had wreaked, while I scrubbed away every trace of her, wanting to cleanse the home of her poisonous presence. We received regular vitriolic calls and texts from Marla, who was now living in a budget motel on the edge of town. Her life of leisure had been permanently disrupted. With her web of lies exposed, old social contacts had abandoned her. Even the lawyers she approached refused to represent someone with her reputation. She was well and truly friendless for the first time in her privileged life. I almost felt pity seeing how far the once untouchable socialite had fallen. But the sting of her cruelty and deception still burned too freshly. "Maybe we should change the locks and security codes, just in case," I suggested to Elliot one evening, after an especially nasty series of messages from Marla blaming us for her downfall. Elliot nodded warily. "Yeah, it's probably not a bad idea. She's clearly becoming more unhinged." We were sipping coffee the next morning when we heard the pounding at the front door. I jumped nervously, but Elliot gave my hand a reassuring squeeze as we made our way to the foyer. I peered through the side window and groaned. Marla stood on the porch. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, clutching a bulging folder of papers. Her fist pummeled the door relentlessly. I swung it open, noting Marla swayed slightly in her impractical stiletto heels. "What do you want, Marla?" Elliot asked with forced patience. "I want back what's owed to me," Marla shrieked. "This is my home, too. I have a legal right." She shook the folder violently at us. I stifled a bitter laugh. "Still clinging to the lies, Marla? That forged will didn't work before. It won't work now." Marla's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Oh, this has nothing to do with the will. I'm referring to my claim as co-signer on this property's mortgage." She flashed a smug grin as Elliot and I exchanged stunned looks. In all the drama, we had overlooked this crucial financial detail. Sensing our realization, Marla cackled. "You didn't actually think I'd hand over my main leverage so foolishly, did you? As long as I'm tied to that mortgage, I have a path back in. So I suggest, no need. The mortgage has been paid off." Elliot's calm words cut through Marla's tirade. Her face went slack. What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I liquidated my inheritance and paid off the entire mortgage 2 days ago," Elliot explained, crossing his arms. "You have no claim here anymore." Marla stared at him in disbelief as the folder of papers slipped from her grasp, scattering across the porch. "It's over, Mother," Elliot stated firmly. "Now please leave before I have to call the police." For once, Marla had no venomous retort, no more schemes to wield. She backed away silently, teetering on her heels as she retreated to her weathered car. Elliot slipped his arm around me as we watched her go. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the sunlight wash over us, bathing everything in hopeful clarity. Perhaps this drawn-out war was finally nearing its end. And emerging from the rubble, Elliot and I had somehow found each other again. The weeks after Marla's final defeat passed in a blur. Elliot and I threw ourselves into restoring normalcy, filling the rooms with love and light once more. We unpacked my eccentric art and vintage finds from storage, arranging them alongside Elliot's architectural drawings and photography. The house slowly began to feel like ours again. Workers helped repair the structural damage and cosmetic sabotage Marla had caused in her zealous renovations. Elliot redesigned parts of the space to be more accessible for any future children we hope to have. Meanwhile, I returned to pursuing my freelance graphic design work, setting up a small home studio. It felt healing to nurture my own passion again. Within a few months, I had built up a robust client list and transitioned my work into a thriving online business. Elliot and I also focused on strengthening the bonds Marla had strained, hosting potlucks with generous neighbors who forgave my absence, having long talks with friends to clear up her malicious gossip. To our relief, we received word that Marla planned to move to another state permanently, wanting a fresh start far removed from her ruined reputation here. We changed the locks one final time, just in case. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, we finally declared the house restored. To celebrate, we hosted an elaborate backyard barbecue. Twinkling lights were strung across the trees, music filled the air, and laughter carried on the breeze. It was a new beginning for everyone. Amongst the festivities, Elliot surprised me by dropping to one knee, presenting me with his late grandmother's ring set in a new band. "I know we've been through so much hardship already as a married couple," he began emotionally, "but I wanted to give you this as a symbol of a fresh start. So will you renew our vows with me?" Through joyful tears, I said yes, embracing my husband tightly. The people around us broke into cheers and applause. It felt like all the brokenness was truly behind us. On a cool evening a few weeks later, we held an intimate lakeside ceremony as the sun set brilliantly behind the trees. Surrounded by close friends and neighbors, we recommitted ourselves to each other after all we had endured. The struggles of the past year had tested us in every way possible, but ultimately the shared trauma had reforged an unbreakable bond between Elliot and I. Later that night, I rested my head contentedly on my husband's chest as we swayed together under the fairy lights twinkling on our back patio. "No matter what she tried, your mother could never destroy this," Elliot said softly, pulling me closer. I smiled up at him. Our love was always stronger than her hate. He leaned down and kissed me tenderly, the adoration in his eyes washing away any remaining shadows of the past. As we turned slowly on the dance floor, the glow from our home enveloped us in warmth. The house was no longer just brick and wood. It now embodied our resilience. With Elliot's hand firmly grasping mine, I knew I had the strength to withstand anything life threw our way next. Marla's bitterness had forged us into warriors, and together we had emerged